There's no point introducing myself because at this point, if you're gonna watch, you already know who I am. I guess tonight I'm doing the first version of my review of False Cathedrals. And I'm trying to make it quick because I have to be in bed in the next half hour.
If I had to do it, you have to do it. Because I'm not waiting a week.
Sure you are.
Anyway.
Okay, so to start, I enjoyed False Cathedrals. I did enjoy it. Overall, I did give it a 99 out of 100, but that was with the extra credit that we'll get into later. And without that extra credit, it would have been a very high B as opposed to a very high A. So don't take your extra credit for granted, is the point here. As far as how I broke it down, plot, I gave you a 10 because nothing happened particularly, like not a whole lot happened, but it wasn't the kind of novel where a lot of stuff is supposed to happen. It's just that you're supposed to think and reflect and view this whole series of events from a sort of abstract point of view, because the whole point of the novel is that we're exploring grief as, you know, just the various stages of grief. And you could probably do that with a very seriously active plot, but I feel like that would have taken it a little bit away from the philosophical aspect of it, which is really what a reflection on grief is. Essentially, nothing much happened because nothing much could happen. It would have ruined the story. So I didn't dock points for that. And go on.
I having reflected on it for a few days, I did like when you told me, I'm like, this, it feels like Inside Out for adults.
Yeah. Which kind of takes me into your characters, actually, because I do know, from what you've told me, I do know that each character was supposed to, or the characters were supposed to represent different stages of grief. And I did dock you a few points for that, but mostly in regards to style, not in regards to how well you developed your characters. In that it was sometimes, you told me that you had a specific vision of what each character, or what stage each character was supposed to represent. And my takeaway was slightly different, but therein is sort of the hang-up, is because everybody processes grief differently. So when you're viewing this from your subjective perspective, you're gonna get a different take than what the author may or may not have intended, simply because grief is a subjective experience. Everyone goes through it differently, and in describing it, you're going to visualize it differently. The reason I docked you for characters, though, was because of Rosemary and Heather. I wanted to see more Rosemary, and I didn't give a shit about Heather. Now, Heather, to give everybody spoilers, Heather is the wife of a character who dies. Now, we see her periodically throughout the story, but she's not all that compelling. And frankly, I did not feel for her in her grief. Her husband, who was a pretty major character in the plot, I was a little bit sad when he died, but I didn't give a shit about what happened to his wife. As far as Rosemary goes, Rosemary is kind of... She, I feel, deserved a day in court, and she didn't get one. So she's a little she's unjustified. Because as you're reading her throughout the book, you do get the sense that she's just a bitch. But once you finish the book and once you go through it and you realize that actually Heather's grieving, or not Heather, but Rosemary is grieving in her own way too. Because it's one of those things that it presents a different side of grief than perhaps you're used to. Where, you know, usually when we talk about grief, we talk about losing people and what, or the state of mourning. And what Rosemary is mourning is something that she was never given in the first place. And that's why I don't like Daniel. Fucking, he's a dickbag.
I'm not gonna defend Daniel.
There's nothing defensible about what he did.
Exactly. I mean, like, some people might argue the whole, like, but he did this, which ultimately is good because then other people no longer have to grieve, like, unnecessary grief, I guess.
He didn't do it for other people, though. He did it, like, he tried to convince himself. On a level, he tried to convince himself that what he was doing was for other people, but it wasn't. It was for himself. Daniel is an innately selfish part. Like, he's that portrayal of the human existence. He is innately selfish. He doesn't really care about anybody but himself and his own grief and his own pain.
Which, I mean, like, if you consider the stage he's meant to represent, it makes sense that he is a selfish person.
Is he the inverse of his name?
Yes, or the two letters of his name.
Denial.
Take the name. Yeah, denial.
And then you had your style. And that also ties in with your characters, because, and I know it's just how you write, but some of your characters, especially when they were in conversation, it was slightly difficult to tell who was talking and who was supposed to be who. And that's the other part about your style, is that you are, as much as you say that I can ramble, you do go on with one sentence for half a paragraph, which is about 4 or 5 lines, and there's a part of you wondering, when does the sentence end? Please, God, let it end before the No, it's just, that's the paragraph. That sentence is the paragraph. Like, and okay, it's not bad, but it doesn't lend itself to dialogue. As far as concept and execution, your style is good for your execution of this concept. Because this isn't you just telling a story. It's something. It's a visceral kind of expression of something that everyone goes through. So as far as concept, because of the nature of the book, it's one of those, what my mom calls a really deep thinking book. In that it does, you spend a lot of time reflecting, not just on the characters, but on instances in your own life where you've had similar experiences or where you've grieved over something that wasn't necessarily a dead loved one. It might have been a choice that you made. So this concept of exploring the variations in grief and what grief is interesting, ironically from a psychological point of view. Your execution, I believe I gave a 4.5.
Okay.
So your plot, I gave a 10 because it didn't really need a plot. Your characters, I gave a 7 because I thought a couple of them were lacking. Your style, I gave an 8, primarily because of your dialogue and your long-winded nature. And then concept and execution. Concept is a 5 because it's an interesting concept. Execution is a 4.5 just because you go on.
I'm long-winded.
You go on for too long sometimes. Not that takes away from the pleasure of the book. It does add to it, and it does kind of help to pinpoint where you are as the narrator. As far as structure, I believe I gave you an 8 because the arrangement of some of the events was sometimes confusing and a little bit hard to follow. So I know you jumped back and forth between the past and the present, and you kept them pretty well contained within each chapter.
Mm-hmm.
The problem therein is that it didn't feel like I was looking back. It didn't feel like I was in a different time. It read kind of the same way.
Mm-hmm.
So, and whether or not that's down to detail, whether or not, like the details of the environment, or whether it's down to the immaturity of the character, because people do grow over time. I had to give it an 8 because it was just, there was, without that specified date in the corner, it was difficult to tell that you jumped back to explore a past event.
Okay.
As far as diction, I gave you an 8, as I told you before, because there are some words that you did not use properly. I would go into detail, but you can't really reprint this book, so
Yeah.
It kind of doesn't matter. But your diction, please look up your words more thoroughly before you use them. Formatting, I gave you a 10 because it was fucking well done. And I think you know that, and I know that, and a lot of people bought the book because of the formatting. The way you did Regina's Diary was just fucking great. It really was. It was experimental, it was unique, it was interesting. Trying to read the text behind the other layers of text, like it was a fun little challenge. It was great. It was nice. I enjoyed it. 10 out of 10. Well done, you. I know that was a pain in your ass. Probably more than the ellipses in How to Cure. But
I would say no. The thing that was more a pain in the ass than the ellipses was Samael's dialogue.
Samael's dialogue, his words all appear backward. Like there's
forward.
There's an ingenuity in the way you formatted this book that not a lot of indie authors have or are capable of replicating. it's kind of unique to you. So I mean, there's no two ways about it. 10 out of 10 on formatting. As far as your length goes, the overall length, I did drop you a point. I did drop you down to 9, just because of the Rosemary Heather thing. Like, I really did want to see a little bit more from Rosemary. Not so much Heather, just because she was not interesting, but Rosemary as a character, given her personality, the situation she's in with a husband who doesn't really love her. He's kind of just using her to fill a void. And the effect that has on a person, I think it would have been interesting to dive into her psyche just from that thought-provoking point of view. Because I feel like she did deserve at least that much. And she really didn't get it, and you sexist prick, you've done her hard.
Well, maybe I'll do a short story from her perspective and just kind of do it that way.
Don't get my hopes up.
I'm totally not going to do it. Anyway, I think you left out, with
quotability and overall satisfaction. Quotability, you did have some good quotes. You did hit your 5 mark. I wasn't going to count anything that was closer to the back of the book because we talked about that more than we talked about the front of the book. But you did hit your 5 mark, particularly when you're talking, when you're reflecting on those little paragraphs, when you're reflecting on the nature of humanity and the innate desire that human beings have to appear more important than they are. Thought overall satisfaction, I gave you a 9.5. And I docked off that half point for your long-winded rambling and the lack of Rosemary, which I'm going to keep on about because I really do feel like you did her character a disservice. 9.5. I was happy with it. It was the ending I wanted. It wasn't a happy ending, but it was the ending I wanted. And as for that extra credit, the thought-provoking bit, it, again, going back to your concept of exploring grief, exploring the different reactions that people have to something that we all go through. People react to grief as differently as people react to death. Some people are, you have to drag them kicking and screaming, and other people are much more willing to accept it, which I think is interesting. So, adding all of that up, and I'll put the numbers on this side, probably. They're probably going to end up on this side. But adding all those up, it's a 99 out of 100. And it might be, in that technical aspect, better than Arcadia, but I liked it as much as I liked Arcadia. So Arcadia might be a few points shy, but that doesn't diminish the overall pleasure that I got just from reading it, just from experiencing those characters and what they were going through and their experiences. And I will recommend it to people. I'll probably give it to someone as a birthday present.
The thing that is the most shocking part for me is the fact that plot got a 10, because and it's not even just with False Cathedrals, it was the same with Arcadia. Whenever the one thing that people are not going to talk about, because there isn't much of one in either book, is plot. Because there's not much action.
There was more plot. There was way more plot to Arcadia than there was to false cathedrals. But that wasn't the point. And if it had just been, if it had not had that thoughtful quality to it, to the concept, that sort of reflective nature that just goes with that content material, then yeah, I probably would have docked you about 5 or 6 points on plot, just because nothing much really happens. But if that's the point, if nothing much is supposed to happen, if it's supposed to be something that's reflective, then that's what you get judged on, because that's what you were trying to be. It's when that is the point of the artwork, and it achieves that, you have to give it credit. You just do. If you're gonna be honest. So that's how I feel about it. I'd recommend it, and I'll leave a link to it in the description. And hopefully people will buy it, because it's worth reading. I think I'll leave it there.